This is the Financially Simple Podcast, a show dedicated to destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner. And now, here's your host, pizza-loving, certified financial planner, Justin Goodbread.
Welcome to Financially Simple. I'm your host, Justin Goodbread, and today we're going to be dealing with a little bit more on the legal side of things, and I want to address the need for employment agreements. That's what I've titled today, the employment agreement. And when it comes to growing the value of your company, this one document may help you sell the company. It may help you add value to the company in ways that you might not consider. So I want to deal with the employment agreement in detail today and talk to you through some real life examples that I've dealt with myself as an employer and deal with some things that I've seen with clients as well. And at the end of this conversation, I hope that you will see the need in an employment agreement, but further, I hope you can see how it adds value to your company. So let's deal with the basic. What is an employment agreement? You know, some people call these things an employment contract, but in a nutshell, it's a formal agreement that is detailing the relationship between you, the employer, and the employee. And it's going to go through the compensation and various expectations. Again, some people may refer to them as contracts, but they're typically executed for a period of time, such as 1 year, such as 5 years, such as, it depends on what type of company you have. Like ours, we have an indefinite employment agreement that we have in place. So the first thing is basically just solidifies the relationship between the employer and the employee. Now, there's many advantages to using them. Number one, it helps you control the employee, the ability for them to lead the business. And we're going to talk about some of the underlying facets in an employment agreement, but it helps you control. It helps you to add clarity to what you're asking that employee to do. It helps you keep things confidential or sensitive as it relates to the company in place. So an employment agreement is not going to force somebody to work with you. You can't do that. But it may also prevent an employee from being a flight risk, from just, the next big business comes along, just take all the time and energy that you put into that employee. Now, there's some disadvantages. There's many disadvantages. Perhaps one is that it's going to bind you, the company, to the agreement, and it's going to limit your flexibility. It's going to cause you to have to negotiate early. Now, that's the disadvantages for many business owners. They want to, and I've seen this happen, they want to go out and paint a rosy picture and only to have the employee a little bit disappointed later on. If you make a promise, a contractual promise, and you can't pay it, then that becomes a problem because it's going to hold you to a contractual agreement. It may create a fair dealing issue. There's a covenant called the Covenant of Good Faith and Fair Dealing, which the judge, if they bring the employment agreement before the judge would say, hey, you did not act in good faith or fair dealing. So the employment agreement has pros and it has cons. To me, though, I see more pros, and I personally use these in my business. So I'm going to say the same thing I've said the last few times is this is why you need a good attorney. I hire a good attorney to help me in my business. And the good attorney is going to tell you the things that works for your local jurisdiction. And a good attorney is going to help you navigate those legal waters so that you don't get in trouble as it relates to treatment of employees. But, the ultimate question is why do we need employment agreements in the first place? And I'm going to tell you that it's going to help you add value to your company. Here's why. Let me paint a scenario for you. I was working with a client not too long ago, and they're selling their business. And the buyer came along, and the buyer was interested in which employees are going to stay. The last thing a buyer wants to do is they want to come into your business and see that you have this all-star rock star team. We talked about in the past, your bench or your team bench, your lineup of your employees is just rock star. The last thing the buyer wants to see is that whenever you leave the company, employees leave because of a new buyer. And so an employment agreement, if properly drafted, knowing that you're potentially going to sell the business or they're potentially trying to add value to the business, the employment agreement will handcuff or will gently encourage the team members to stay cohesive. So that's number one. A good employment agreement will add value to the employee. Thus, the employee is going to buy into the vision and the mission of the company. I've seen many employment agreements that there are bonus structures in place. If the company does X, the employee gets Y. And so a good employment agreement shows the employee that there is incentive. And it may be why, it may be pay, it may be time off, it may be company stock, it may be a percentage of selling interest. Just depends on where it is. But nonetheless, the employment agreement is going to add value. It will add value to your company because it's going to put those members on your team who only want to be with your team.
You are listening to Financially Simple, destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner.
So with that, what is in an employment agreement? And for that, I brought up our employment agreement that we use as a template our attorneys drafted for us. I brought it up today, just kind of walk through the points. And, your employment agreement may be different. It really may be. Let me say this. It will be different. Every state in the United States, every jurisdiction is going to have different controlling bodies. And this is where an attorney in your area can guide you through the things which are most important. So right off the bat, I noticed in our employment agreement that we talk about the type of employment. So this is a full-time employment contract, the one I'm looking at here. So it lists the employer, my companies, the employee, when you would fill the name there. And this is a full-time basis employee is what we're looking at here. You may have a part-time basis employee in this particular thing. In Tennessee, we are considered an at-will state. And so the term is at will. Now, your state may be different. You may not be an at-will state. In our state, anybody can terminate employees at any time. We don't have to work out an agreement here, and any party can do that. The third thing I notice is the duties. And it's clearly spelled out on what the employee is to do and what the employer is to do. It says, things like this employee is to act in the capacity of a financial advisor. This employee is to act in the capacity of a CFP. The employer is to provide the catalyst or the work environment to which the employee can do their job. This employment agreement that I'm looking at also deals with business hours, and it deals with what type of compensation. So this is a salary-based compensation I'm looking at. It has salary, it has revenue share, it has performance bonuses all included. It deals with there's not going to be any overtime pay. We're not hourly wage in this particular contract, but you may say, look, I've got an employee that's making X number of dollars an hour, plus they get time and a half or double time for when they work weekends or holidays, whatever is specific for your industry. So this one deals with the hours and it deals with compensation. Then it goes into employee benefits and it talks about if we participate in medical or life or disability or retirements, anything that we offer any employees in the organization, this individual has the right to participate in. It deals with business expenses. If the employee incurs any expenses, as it relates to their job, then the employer, the company, is going to reimburse that expense or cover that expense. We deal with paid time off, holidays, fringe benefits. We deal with some confidentiality things. So like we have a company computer that this particular employee has. It's a laptop computer and it's for business purposes only. Perhaps you say there's going to be a company vehicle. I've seen that many, many times that the employee has the opportunity to use a company vehicle. We deal with taxes and the fact that we're going to have withholding. So this is going to be a W-2 employee versus a 1099 subcontractor. And we deal with that in the agreement. We're going to deal with the extent of service. Basically, that the employer and the employees are going to act with diligence and competence. Here's that employee's duty and employer's duty of good faith and loyalty. That's one of those legal terms that we have here in Tennessee. In this employment agreement, we deal with work product. We deal with the fact that we deal with confidential information and that we have certain things that are trademarked. We have certain things that use software that this individual realizes that they do not own that software. We deal with licensing. Because this is a financial advisor, this person is required to hold certain license that work with regulatory agencies. And so this particular person has to have license and permits. Maybe you don't need license in your area. This is where an attorney can help you. We deal with termination. What's it going to take for termination? So in ours, remember, we're an at-will state. You may have to have termination for cause or termination without cause. In ours, we deal with death. So what happens if the employee dies? What happens to their revenue? How do we deal with that? If we do end up terminating for cause, what are those actions that need to take place? Because of the service that we offer, we have to deal with the federal government and the Financial Institution Regulatory Association, the SEC, and the state regulators, depending on which body is overseeing us for jurisdiction. So we have reasons that termination for cause may come back. We have reasons for termination without cause. We have issues to where if the employee is brought on or requested to go for some sort of litigation issue, we have to deal with that in the employment agreement. We have restrictive covenants. And this is perhaps one of the things that I see the most that you can do, which will add value to your company. Not just from a value growing dollars and cents, but value from a peace of mind standpoint. So we put restrictive covenants in our agreements. We have a non-competition agreement. The non-competition prevents the employee from working with any of the current clients that the company owns. They can't do it. Now, Tennessee, you can leave and they could go work somewhere else. We can't do a full non-compete like some states can, but we can prevent them from working with our clients or our employees or certain consultants, et cetera, within a jurisdiction, according to our legal department. We also have non-solicitation. So not only can the employee not leave the company and then have clients call them, but they can't leave the company before or after and call clients and say, hey, I'm leaving, come with me. Or employees, I can't have a coup within my business. According to the agreement, there shouldn't be a coup within my business where half the business leaves and takes the team with them and all the customers and leaves me holding nothing. I'm protecting my asset, so to speak. They can't solicit employees. And ultimately, there's confidentiality with all of our client stuff and everything we deal with. We have to have a really beefed up confidentiality agreement. And then we deal with what happens if any of this happens. How do you deal with it? So you have what's called remedies upon breach. You deal with enforceability and jurisdictions. You deal with survival. Then you start explaining things. So we have all sorts of legalese. We have a no assumption for obligation. We have assignment. In other words, they can't assign this contract to somebody else. We have to deal with enforceabilities. We deal with amendments of the governing laws, who our legal counsel is. In our agreement, and we're going to talk about this in our next episode, we have an employee handbook. And we have a compliance manual. We have two different documents which govern the behavior. One's from the regulatory environment and one is from the business environment. And so the employment agreement addresses both of those, that this individual is going to maintain and abide by the employee handbook, which protects the company, and it's going to abide by the compliance manual, which is the rules set forth by the regulatory bodies to whom we have to abide. So the employment agreement lays all this out. In this particular agreement, we are helping this individual obtain a CFP designation, and we're paying for it. So there is a requirement that this individual is going to seek and obtain that certification. So as you can see, an employee agreement, an employment agreement is more than, hey, you're going to work for me and I'm going to pay you X. No, a good attorney is going to draft an agreement that is taking into account the rules of your jurisdiction and try to help save your business from lots of heartache. Notice I said try. Now, just because you have an employment agreement doesn't mean that people are always going to abide by them. And so what the agreement, according to counsel that we talk with, what they're going to be trying to do is if you end up having trouble or if you end up in a situation where there's an argument and a court comes into play or a judge or a mediation firm comes into play, depending on how your agreement reads, that you're in a position as the employer to protect the organization. That's the whole reason for the employment agreement. It's just often a protection, but not only from things that may cause conflict, but you're also trying to protect the organization from losing value. Again, think about the picture. You now are in the process of selling your organization, and one of your key employees decides they don't want to be a part of the new company for some reason, whatever the reason is. And the buyer finds out about it. Now, all of a sudden, you could lose your potential sale because you didn't do your employment agreements correctly to begin with. So for me, it's one of those things where we sign the employment agreements right off the bat, day one. We sign all the documents and we lay out the employment agreement on the front end that helps everybody be above board. I use the term above reproach. You want to lay out a understanding between the employer, you the company, or you the owner, or you the manager who's listening to this podcast, and the potential employee. And, you know, I go back to the old golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And, you know, candidly, many people don't understand business, and that's okay. But we can treat people fairly, and we can treat people ethically. And at the same time, we can treat people in such a way that they are mutually benefiting and we are mutually benefiting in this employer-employee relationship. And with that, I ask you, how are your employment agreements? Do you have them? Do you have them on your key people, if nothing else? If not, now may be the time for you to start thinking about your employment agreements. Now may be the time to talk to your value growth advisor. Now may be the time to talk to your attorney. You say, Justin, I don't know how to do anything like that. Hey, give us a call. Reach out to us through Financially Simple. If we got a page on this that says book a meeting with Justin, reach out. We can chat through it. We can talk about how we can add value to you and your company. Guys, with that, I'm going to close up this particular episode of the Financially Simple podcast. You know, like I say every week, life is hard. It is. Life is complicated. Life can be frustrating. Money doesn't have to be. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Y'all go out and make it a great day.
You have been listening to the Financially Simple podcast. The information in this show is for informational purposes only. This show is not investment advice. Instead, seek help from a competent financial advisor. Justin Goodbread, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Heritage Investors, a registered investment advisor.